Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I would like to open this event on behalf of WRI Brasil and the New Climate Economy Initiative. First of all, let me give you a few instructions. We have two channels, one for the original audio in Portuguese, another one in English. If you wish to send questions, please use the questions icon at the bottom of the screen. I'd like to move on to our opening session. It's an honor to have you with us. WRI Brasil and the New Climate Economy will invite you to speak about social, environmental, and economic benefits of the Building Back Better, a new economy for a new era, elements to build a more efficient and resilient economy for Brazil. The study tried to answer the question how Brazil can prioritize the transition to a low-carbon economy in the next decade. That study shows that building back better is possible. It is possible to create 2 million jobs, increase Brazilian GDP in 2.3 billion, among other results that are very encouraging. The study is part of the New Economy for Brazil initiative that is bringing together former ministers, businessmen, representatives of the financial sector, the academia, civil society, around the step-by-step to transition and move on to a low-carbon initiative. This initiative tries to answer how Brazil can be more efficient and resilient, fair and sustainable. We will continue along that path, conducting different studies, and we will invite everyone to join us. We want to extend our heartfelt thanks for the support of the Good Energies and the Moore Foundation, and the partnership of UFRJ, CPI, IPEA, FEBRABAN, PUC Rio de Janeiro, CEBEDS, and our partners. I turn it over to Marcelo Furtado, the chairman of the board at WRI Brasil, who will conduct this conversation. Thank you very much to all our speakers today and those that are joining us. Please do not forget to send in your questions. Marcelo, you have the floor. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. It is an honor to be here today. I would like to start by asking Carol to make a presentation to us. Carol Janin, Climate Director for WRI Brasil. She will speak about the study, the key ideas, and right after, we will listen to our guests. Carol? Thank you, Marcelo. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for showing interest in our study. Let me share my presentation. A New Economy for Brazil, as Rachel pointed out, is an initiative whose first product was a study that was launched on August 13th called A New Economy for a New Era, Elements to Build a More Efficient and Resilient Economy for Brazil. Next. This study wouldn't have been possible without a number of partners to whom we are thankful. Among them, PUC Rio, the Department of Economics, CPI, COP, a number of researchers that joined us, IPEA, FEBRABAN, and CEBEDS. The New Economy for Brazil was created in 2019 to identify policies that would reduce poverty and inequality and help to contribute towards economic and sectoral targets, foster environmentally sustainable economic growth, and make Brazil more resilient to extreme weather events. This event began with a question from our first global studies. What would happen If a country such as Brazil adopted the measures being recommended to mitigate weather problems, would that help the economy? Would that hurt the economy? Global studies showed a positive correlation, that is, better economic growth would go hand in hand with weather mitigation measures. But to what extent would that work in countries such as Brazil? In 2019, we began that study to answer that very question. The results were rather positive because we already conducted that study considering a scenario of fiscal recession or a not so positive scenario 10 years ago when we were not yet facing the current crisis. Even analyzing a complicated fiscal scenario, the results would be the following. A green economy would make Brazil grow even more in the next decade than the current development model. So the scenarios I'll show you determine that if Brazil ambitiously invests in measures to transition to a low and green carbon economy, that would mean more jobs and more GDP growth. We would have an additional GDP growth of $2.8 trillion by 2030, and the creation of at least 2 million additional jobs by 2030. The study also shows that green growth and building back better is not a rupture to the Brazilian economy, but rather a prioritization of existing good practices. That means that we already have the legal framework. Our industry is ready to do what's necessary for that transition. And that transition towards a new economy would benefit traditional sectors such as infrastructure, industry, and agriculture. In all those three cases, the transition to a low-carbon economy would create jobs and increase productivity and competitiveness in all those three sectors: infrastructure, industry, and agriculture. Brazil would be less unequal, more competitive, and deforestation-free. And why deforestation-free? Because by increasing productivity in crop production, we would be able to reduce pressure for new areas to be put into production. That's the rationale behind it. Next. This is a very important graph prepared by the economic modeling team, showing that the Brazilian economic growth would be detached from emissions. Brazil can reduce its emissions while growing economically simultaneously. Those three lines are important to be explained. The yellow line, or orange, represents the current economy that we call business as usual, if nothing changed. The dark blue line would be a case in which Brazil would adopt a few measures towards a transition to a green economy. Measures such as converting part of our fleet into electric vehicles, replacing fossil fuels by ethanol, reducing deforestation, measures of that type that Brazil could already implement or escalate. The light green line is a scenario in which Brazil would broadly adopt those measures. That would be the most positive scenario. As the graph shows, applying a few or many measures towards building it better would be already an improvement if compared to the current scenario. Next. What does that entail in practice? That entails that besides improving the GDP and creating new jobs, we would gain efficiency in the Brazilian economy. Once again, traditional economy, infrastructure, agriculture, and industry, because we would potentiate comparative advantages that we have, many of them based on our natural capital, would attenuate negative externalities and would reduce our exposures to production and reputational risks. We can see that weather events may represent risks to our productivity, especially in agriculture. This graph illustrates what this path involves towards building back better. If we observe the gray bar, it's our economy without doing anything else, business as usual. Dark green represents the widest number of measures towards a low-carbon economic transition. The difference between the gray and the dark green bars is a 44% increase of our GDP represented by agriculture alone. And how would we achieve that? The study also proposed solutions and recommendations that could be economically feasible to the country, considering the current fiscal situation. That being the case, we noticed that we would need 25 billion reals to recover 12 million hectares of pastures in greater degree of degradation. 12 million hectares is what Brazil purports to recover. This is what has been committed to in the Paris Accord. With 11% of the annual crop plan, it would be possible to recover those 12 million hectares, generating a return of 19 billion in 10 years and a tax collection of 742 million reals. We could recover that area using money that has already been set aside for investments in agriculture. It doesn't mean new investment. It's just a matter of prioritizing what already exists. We should also remember that we can achieve that using available technologies in Brazil to intensify and improve livestock production. And that would help increase the income of producers in up to 3.5 times. In agriculture, for instance, no-till would improve yield by 30%, would improve yield in our second crop by 50%, and if we recover 12 million hectares, we would increase the number of head per area, we would increase the gross value of our production, the crop-livestock integration, where we can have the two types of production in the same area without touching the forests. The cattle would gain more weight and we would gain yield in soybean production. This is important because what if we don't do any of that? It doesn't mean that everything will remain as is. We estimate that Brazil could lose 2.5% of its GDP by 2050 because of extreme weather events, droughts or floods, changes in rainfall, strong winds, as we have seen. Brazil could also lose 32% of the soybean acreage because of temperature and weather changes caused by the loss of forests. So the negative impact of $4 billion by 2050 in crops such as cotton, rice, coffee, corn, and soybeans that today are very important. So that would account for 50% of those losses. In areas such as renewable energy, Brazil has a lot to discuss. Another important point about this study is that this study is not a silver bullet. It doesn't present all solutions. It's just food for thought. What paths should Brazilian society take? So the use of biomass-based fuels, we could use plants of renewable micro generators, especially in more remote areas that can benefit from our transmission lines, the construction of plants for the production of thermal solar energy equipment, especially in remote areas, as a way to positively impact job creation and the increase of local income. We could generate a local economy to create parts, and the use of biogas to generate power, a very important resource, especially where we have the city dumps, the expansion of biofuel production on degraded pasture land. We have to discuss that cautiously, but Brazil has a vocation for biofuels production, and that has to be considered strategically in the next decade. Transportation. For a transition phase, it would be possible to use natural gas in our pre-salt system for sea transportation, replacing diesel that is highly pollutant. That technology is available, and the study shows that the use of natural gas for vessels would require minor changes and already available technology. We could also create incentives to the electric bus industries. Brazil is an exporter of conventional buses. We will be an exporter of electric buses. We already have plants in Brazil for electric buses, and we already produce the batteries, the production of biofuels with a greater potential in the global market. We must remember that this is a strategic choice, as we did in the past with Embraer and ethanol production. We must decide if we will use second-generation biofuels. We are leaders in this area, and we would embrace a new market, the new market for aviation fuels, for instance. The development of ethanol fuel cells for long-haul trucks. Let us remember that Brazil is heavily dependent on the highway system, and we are highly dependent on trucks for logistics. So if we use ethanol fuel cells for long-haul trucks, would bring about a significant change not only to our economy, but also to our emissions. Finally, we have a lot to gain with the sustainable infrastructure. Brazil clearly needs infrastructure. Infrastructure is one of the sectors that most creates jobs in a moment of economic recession. But it requires a lot of cash to build infrastructure. The study shows that choosing quality infrastructure, this is a definition from the G20, using not only good materials, but having social and environmental concerns in those projects, would allow Brazil to access new funding sources, investors that are concerned with the environmental issues. Between 1995 and 2017, Brazil spent $180 billion rebuilding infrastructure that cannot weather extreme weather events. We can build better, more efficiently, and more resiliently, not to build again. This is already a fact. Between 2013 and 2017, over half of municipalities were declared emergency or catastrophe areas. Investments needed to improve cargo transportation would account for 2% of the GDP, but with a payback period of 3 years. So these are important investments, but the return may be faster than we might imagine. Finally, opportunities. The study also wanted to show how there are opportunities for Brazil. in order to benefit from the current situation to invest in building back better, something being done by other countries in a moment of economic crisis. Brazil has the potential to generate $1.3 trillion in sustainable investments in areas such as energy, construction, transportation, waste management, and energy efficiency. There are innovation opportunities using Brazilian technology. Brazil has technology. We must decide and prioritize scale. That would help the national economy in several areas. Finally, the market of bonds. Sustainable investment assets reached 161 trillion reals, an increase of 34% in 2 years. Green bond issuance and loans expand quickly, and they have achieved a global all-time record of $202 billion in 2009. But Brazil is still very shy. Green bond issuance in Brazil followed positive international trends, granted, but only achieved a fraction of its potential, $5.1 billion. In Latin America, we are behind Chile. We do not lead that market in South America, not even in Latin America. Well, thank you very much for your attention. This was a brief summary of our results just to feed our debate. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Carol. Excellent presentation. So once again, for those who wish to listen to this discussion in English, just click on the US flag on the top of the screen. And there is also another icon for you to increase your volume. Interestingly enough, I noticed that today, well, Brazil in the past changed the capital from Salvador to Rio de Janeiro. It is difficult to make that decision, and it's difficult to make decisions that impact the whole country. For those decisions to take place, we certainly need different elements present. Political will, we must have the support of the civil society, engagement of the academia, the private sector, and the change of the economy is no different. And that's why we created this panel with representatives of all those sectors, people with a lot of experience, and we will invite them to present their initial thoughts. But as important as our speakers are those participating in this live. We have about 1,000 people joining in, 800 in Brazil and 200 overseas. We are discussing the role Brazil can play in a transformation of the global economy and our contribution. So I would like to encourage participants to send in their questions using the questions icon, because we will have two periods. First with the presentations and then a Q&A session. It's very important to have a study backing us up, but doing it is a lot better. I would like to start our conversation inviting João Adrian, pitching in for Minister Tereza Cristina, to speak a little about the challenge from the standpoint of the Brazilian government. We do have a challenge. Brazil today, unfortunately, is more famous because of deforestation and illegal logging than the potential of our sustainable and green economy. Could you speak a little about how you see not only the challenge, but mainly how you see this potential? Thank you very much for joining in. Very nice, Marcelo. Thank you for the opportunity. For us at the Ministry of Agriculture, it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I wish to thank Carol for the invitation and greet Caio, Joaquim, Walter, Carolina. Minister Teresa Cristina unfortunately couldn't attend, but as this discussion is very timely because the study considers agriculture as a solution as an important pillar in a long-term vision. The way we see it, agriculture is an industry that produces renewable products, a circular economy, and in a long-term vision, this sector is really vital. Early this year, in January, during the meeting in Germany, we presented an agenda with guidelines for sustainable development for Brazilian crop and livestock production. Because of the pandemic, we were unable to publish that agenda in Brazil. But I would like to share with you 3 guidelines that we understand as key, and the study confirms that. The first guideline that we understand as a priority for our policies, to Marcelo's question, is to strengthen innovation and sustainable production. The study clearly shows how Brazil, over the past 40 years, agriculture developed or adapted to the tropics. We increased our yield. Agriculture over the past 40 years increased production by 400%, whereas we only increased acreage by 40%. We became a global player, a supplier of food, energy, and fiber. Using 13% of our territory, almost 60% is covered with native vegetation. Brazil has technology that allows for production increase and environmental preservation. The study clearly shows that we have a large inventory of land that could be used more intensively. About 50 to 60% of our pasture land have certain level of degradation, and we have technology to intensify the use of that area. Technology would be very important. Our crop plan, which is a credit policy, and the low-carbon agriculture plan, whose objective is to promote sustainable innovations. In the last 10 years of the low-carbon plan, we estimate that 32 million hectares of pasture land underwent some type of improvement. About 11 million were actually recovered. Therefore, we have a huge potential and an ability to intensify production in those areas. We have political policies that can address that problem, but we must prioritize them over the next few years. We also have an energy matrix that is renewable. So Brazil is a major player in renewable energy. Therefore, this sector must be prioritized as a strategy towards a new economy. Our second pillar is production inclusion. We have a large number of small farmers in Brazil that must be included in this new economy, because sustainability cannot be a factor of exclusion. We must include small farmers in that economy. And for small farms, production, diversification, value added, and well-structured supply chains are really key. And obviously, to do that, we are prioritizing technical assistance and agriculture extension services as a way to integrate farmers to new technological models. The last pillar has to do with our priorities. And those have to do with what Marcelo said on deforestation. This is our third guideline. Environmental and land adequacy. Brazil still suffers from a problem of having effective land governance. About 50 million hectares in the legal Amazon area have no owner. The state does not know who is occupying that area. So the non-land governance presents problems and challenges in order to fight illegal activities, to bring those farmers to inclusion and promotion activities. Due to a lack of land governance, we have a large number of farmers who are not included in the system. So land deeds is really important, and the implementation of the Brazilian Forest Code, one of the broadest and stringent legislations in the world. We want to bring more legal certainty to the Brazilian farmers while promoting conservation. Those are the three pillars we are prioritizing in our public policies. Land and environmental regularity along with the other two pillars, and they will contribute towards a sustainable and resilient economy adapted to weather changes. And my final message at the ministry is that agriculture is a solution to the challenges of the new millennium. Sustainable intensification has to be our focus. We must find the means to implement the necessary measures. Resources are really key. Green loans, as Carol said, are key. The ministry launched a work plan to structure that model. But resources, technical assistance, and the support of our society are really vital. So our words of gratitude for this opportunity. I want to commend the organizers for organizing such an important discussion, but COVID-19 emphasized the need for that discussion so that we can have satisfactory growth. Thank you very much, and I'll be around to answer questions. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much, João. I can tell you that we have lots of questions addressed to you, and I'll try and summarize them in our second session. I'm very happy that a person in charge of that area is here with us. Our next speaker is former Ministry of Finance, Joaquim Levy, a partner of this study, without whom we couldn't have gone this far. Mr. Levy, one point has to do with technological innovation. How can Brazil find its comparative and competitive advantage in an economy in the 21st century? Could you share with us where you see opportunities, but also where you see challenges? Because to promote that transformation, we must put more energy in some areas, but we have to learn to lift our foot from the accelerator pedal and change the course of other sectors in our economy. As a former member of BNDES, World Bank, the Ministry of Finance, you have a bird's eye view, and your contribution would be invaluable. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be able to participate in this meeting. I would like to greet all my colleagues participating as panel members. I would like to congratulate Carolina for the study that she led. Marcelo, as the study showed, and as the ministry pointed out, Brazil can be an extraordinary leader in sustainability. First, because of the quality of our natural resources. Even with the current technologies of wind energy, as we know, our energy mix is essentially renewable. We have an extraordinary battery system, which is our hydropower electric system. Even if other types of energy production have come into operation. Along with our energy market, you can bring together wind energy, hydropower plants, biomass, and other sources of energy production. Very few countries, or perhaps no other country, is able to do that currently. We have to keep on innovating in that area. We have institutions that can help in that regard. Even our energy auction system that began 20 years ago started being discussed as of 2001. It's a major comparative advantage Brazil has. Even in the forestry area, we have significant advantages. It's a bioeconomy that already exists today. For instance, Brazil today can produce what I would call low carbon or green steel. We don't explore the full potentiality of that system, although we use bits and pieces. We have vegetable coal of industrial forests using to produce pig iron, and we also have the steel mills that are very important in Brazil. Although there is a lot of scrap being produced besides the pig iron, we need to reduce CO2 emissions in our traditional steel production. And today we are at a major advantage as compared to other countries. And in a relatively short period of time, we can increase production of pig iron and vegetable coal and steel in general. We know that an eucalyptus forest in Brazil grows very quickly in less than 10 years. Why am I saying that? In order to mention pastures, we know that meat demand today in the world is really strong, especially in Asia and Southeast Asia. But cattle production will not triple in the next few years. With improved pasture land, we can increase the land available to plant grains, soybeans for instance, instead of deforesting the cerrados in the Mato Piba region. We may have occasional deforestation, but grain production in the Northeast helps create income. And as suggested by Carol, we can promote the integration between crop, livestock, and forest production. We can expand forests, and if we are shifting away from fossil fuels, we will have net gains. Obviously, we have to do the right math, but beyond the shadow of a doubt, we will be able to get carbon credits. So it's a combination of several activities, some already connected to a bioeconomy that can grow significantly. Research in wood use, especially in civil construction, would be timely because the use of charcoal, if we use wood correctly in civil construction, you would have a long-lasting carbon sequestration. With a more developed carbon credit market, we can achieve other sources of income to farmers. So, solar and wind energy, we can double the production of energy in Brazil using wind power, but it has its limitation. It cannot replace everything being run using fossil fuel. In the case of solar energy, we would be able to generate enough energy even to be used in transportation. Other biofuels are also present here. As Carol said, palm oil production in degraded land would have a positive impact. I don't know if the ministry has looked at that, but there is an opportunity to create jobs and to adjust the existing land illegality. I must emphasize that today, 20% of our soybean production goes for biodiesel. And we import a significant volume of diesel because we can't refine it all in Brazil. We should invest in biodiesel, be it from soybean or from other sources, even using palm oil being produced in the eastern portion of the Amazon region in the state of Pará. So with a bit of research based on existing knowledge, we can develop a bioeconomy that can grow quickly its volume, being able to create dozens of thousands of jobs. But all of that requires planning, discussion. One of the biggest values of that document is that it allows for discussion by creating a structure based on which we can develop those discussions in order to value our ability to produce solar energy through integrated circuits based on silicon and solar energy, as I mentioned before, using either wood, seeds, and sugar cane. And there is still room for growth. Different types of renewable energy sources. The productivity of all those types of technology today is already a benefit compared to fossil fuel. With what we have today, we can compete. Sometimes we need to mobilize financial resources, and there is a whole discussion with the financial sector. But as the study mentioned, these are not solutions that will be a weight to the economy that would make Brazil less efficient. Much on the contrary, these are solutions that would make the economy more efficient, that would leverage existing activities, and that could give Brazil a unique advantage looking 20 years out, even hydrogen, because of solar energy, we will be able to produce hydrogen at competitive levels without affecting other sectors in our economy. Thank you very much, and I want to congratulate the organizers for that study, for bringing it to this broad and important discussion right now. Thank you. Thank you, Joaquim. I would like to emphasize that it's a privilege to have a former Ministry of Finance speaking about sustainability. This is another important characteristic that we must emphasize. If you wish to read the study, you can download it in Portuguese. The study in English has a summary on our website. The complete study in English will be available in a couple of weeks. It's important to say that none of that would have been possible without our partners. But by participating in this live, I'm sure there are other partners that were not mentioned. Please say something, because at WRI, we don't believe in doing anything by ourselves. We believe in doing it together. So if you like the idea, please join us. Walter Schalke, the other day I heard, have you imagined if we could invent a machine that would eliminate CO2 from the atmosphere, that would play music? But we already have that, I said. That's what a tree does, especially if you maintain a forest alive, if you maintain the diversity of fauna and flora. Animals would produce music. Therefore, a challenge to Brazil is the maintenance of live forest, the recovery of degraded pastures, and the role of industrial forests in green economy. You represent the largest company in the world in that sector, the number one company in Brazilian agribusiness. I'm very happy that you can join us together today. And the question I want to ask you is, obviously, doing is better than saying it. And since you're one of the signatories to this document that involves over 70 companies, in your opinion, what are the most important signs that the private sector wants to receive? And what are the main bottlenecks? Because it's important to see where there are roadblocks along the way. Walter? Marcelo, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here today with you. I would like to start by thanking Marcelo and Rachel for the opportunity. I want to congratulate Carolina for the brilliant study you conducted. It's a pleasure to be part of a discussion along with the former Minister Levi, someone who brings so much contribution to Brazilian society. João, I want to commend the ministry for the work you have been doing. Very impactful and positive, creating a lot of value to Brazilian society. So thank you very much, and I extend my heartfelt thanks to you and the whole team at the ministry. Also, Caio, someone I respect a lot, someone I learned a lot from. So this debate is quite rich. Let me give you a perspective of Brazil. Brazil cannot and should not be just an exporter of commodities. Brazil is highly competitive in many of our commodities, but we can and should integrate supply chains. We should be a lot more competitive and participate a lot more in the global economy through the integration of the different supply chains. Minister Levy mentioned energy. Energy may be a key factor behind the transformation of the Brazilian economy. Many activities that are energy intensive, and the cost of energy in Brazil is very high. If supply chains were integrated, we could reduce the cost of energy. And I would like to bring you an important discussion: the cost of capital. I'd like to remind you that the German government a few weeks ago issued a 30-year bond at an almost zero interest rate. It was slightly negative. Some investors in Germany decided to give the German government 100 euros so that in 30 years, the government could return a little less than 100 euros to them at an interest rate close to zero. What can we do in Brazil? Imagine if we can make major investments in Brazil with these resources that could come from Germany or other countries at a 2% interest rate in 30 years. To do a simple math, I know we have to calculate compound interest. In German investors, instead of receiving 100 euros, would receive 160 euros 30 years from now. And at 2% interest rate, we could potentiate wind energy, solar energy that create a super value and environmentally are better, and the cost of energy would come down. So it's a win-win-win situation. And Brazil would become very competitive energy-wise, and that could potentiate other supply chains like the steel, aluminium, could help preserve water, which is a relevant issue in Brazil. That's the first enabler Brazil may have, a capital cost that might allow us to leverage growth. The second point I would like to mention that to me is quite relevant, and this is something you raised, Marcelo, forests. I would like to start with a very important point, which is the preservation of the conservation of our existing native forests. That conservation may help us capture enormous value through carbon. Brazil can and should position itself at COP26 in Glasgow to adopt Article 26 of the Paris Agreement for a cap-and-trade system that would create an enormous value for Brazil through carbon. Our estimates are that Brazil could generate about $10 billion a year preserving or conserving the native forests that we have. The largest source of emissions of CO2 in Brazil is the fires. As João mentioned very well, Brazil doesn't need extra area. Brazil has been growing its yield in existing areas, and we have an enormous potential. But Brazil can also plant forests, both native and industrial forests. We can plant eucalyptus, as Suzano does, in order to diversify its production mix. Suzano and other companies can create an enormous value to Brazil, replacing other non-renewable materials such as plastic. Suzano set a very bold target to remove 10 million tons of plastic in the next 10 years through the use of pulp in other uses, like in the textile market, replacing polyester or replacing single-use plastic packages that represent such a big problem to society, because pulp is a renewable and biodegradable material, and it can bring a lot of value to society. And bio oil through lignin, replacing other materials that come from fossil fuels. So Brazil has an enormous value to create value from wood, planted forests. Brazil has a history in that area. The triple bottom line, which is social, environmental, and economic components, are present. We do see an enormous potential, and that may change the face of Brazil. And to do that, we must work on the second element, which is regulation. The regulation of different sectors in Brazil, an enormous potential that can create a lot of value. So the combination of a regulation that would allow Brazil to grow appropriately with a low capital cost, benefiting from that window of opportunity where the cost of capital in Brazil is close to zero, that would be an enormous potential to change our economic mix, create jobs, invest in education, reduce inequality, especially the worst inequality, the inequality of opportunities. So to us, we can open a new horizon to Brazil after the pandemic. The pandemic can be a moment for us to rethink what we want 20 years from now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Schalke. One of your points is very important. We have to look at positive externalities. Sometimes we think about one positive activity, but we don't think of the consequences this may trigger. Your point on renewable energy sources was very valid. And when we move on to the Q&A session, I will ask you a question on the role of gas. If gas is an enabler to move from traditional fossil fuels to other sources, it might be a hurdle as well. So we must dosage that well. But you gave us an example of a financial instrument in Germany, and our next speaker, Caio, is a German Brazilian or a Brazilian German, and he has that privileged vintage point. As he is also a former minister himself, he can share with us not only what is happening in the world in terms of financial instruments, but perhaps most importantly, what are the expectations that Brazil has and sees about Brazil? Caio, I would like you to speak about something else which is new this year. We are used to feeling pressure from society, companies leading transformation processes, but in this moment of a pandemic, we see more activism on the part of investors. It would be interesting to see your view on that. Caio? Thank you, Marcelo. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those in Europe. Better climate, better growth. That was the key message of the Global Commission for a New Economy of the Climate in 2014. The message was based on very extensive global studies. Better climate, better growth are not contradictions. That had a significant impact on the Paris COP deliberations and the Paris Agreement. Next, as a global commission, we conducted studies involving different countries like Indonesia and now Brazil. The Green Deal from the European Committee also turned into programs and enormous funds for green recovery, reflect that concept of transformation at a gigantic scale. As the study was presented by Carolina, there is no country at a better position than Brazil in terms of natural capital and the possibility to be transformed to become a champion in sustainability. Strong economic growth and social integration, as Joaquim also said, Brazil is an imminent potential green power with a strong business community, research, advanced development that are able to make Brazil a soft power with a global leadership in tomorrow's world. Unfortunately, as we speak, in many areas, the country is heading towards the opposite direction, deforesting the Amazon region even more and affecting institutions. The image Brazil has overseas is negative, hurting our access to markets, leading to the removal of international capital. Fortunately, we also see many promising initiatives. João and Schalke already said, in sync with the messages of our report. In the private sector, the three major banks for the sustainability of the Amazon region, for a new bioeconomy based on a standing forest and with water resources, measures from the central bank towards a financial sector that uses sustainability criteria. The financial sector will play a very important role in the green transformation of the Brazilian economy. Schalke has already mentioned a few of the aspects based on the recent European experience. I suggest 3 priority action areas. First, to formulate between the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, private and public banks, a national strategy, a roadmap to create a sustainable financial sector. As next steps, the technical studies could begin at the central bank and at FEDRABAN, the Brazilian Federation of Banks. Second, mandatory disclosure of financial risks related to climate change, and the disclosure by the central bank that would be in charge of overseeing that. That could change the face of the economy. Larger companies could lead voluntarily that initiative, as is happening in several cases. Third, to price carbon as being done in other countries, China, Europe, even to avoid future tariff restrictions preventing access to other markets. All 3 suggestions would involve tough political decisions, but I believe that, as in other countries, the private sector can lead and take the first steps. Thank you. Thank you, Caio. Thank you very much for those 3 suggestions. I think we can now begin with a round of questions. I would like to read some of the questions we received from our participants. It's important to say that we are being recorded and this conversation will be available on the website of WRI Brasil. If you have a friend who missed this live, you can refer our website. If you want to go over what was promised and said, you can visit our website. Kyle talked about disclosing environmental risk, so perhaps that question would go to several people. João, we received a question about the implementation of the Forest Code. Let me also include the inclusion of small farmers as an important element, because all speakers here understand that we are not talking about a green economy in the environmental sense only. In Brazil, when we speak about the environment, we are talking about the social environmental component. The moments of boycotts or exclusions are something of the past. For the future, we need tools that promote inclusion and technological transformation as a transformation that integrate both social and environmental aspects. So the implementation of the Forest Code, how can that help as a backdrop, as Schalke said? But can we also speak about the inclusion of small farmers and the inclusion of those that do not necessarily participate in the current economic situation? If you want to talk to me, contact me via chat. And later, I'll ask other questions. Thank you, Marcelo, for the opportunity to speak about the Forest Code. The competence to implement that law is in the hands of the Ministry of Agriculture. In the past, it was in the Ministry of the Environment. To us, it is an opportunity because we are able to integrate ag policies to the conservation needs. Today, we can understand the challenges behind the implementation of the Forest Code as a crop and livestock policy. We can use our structure, be it through rural credit, through our superintendencies, the secretariats of agriculture and the environment. In the crop plan this year, we broadened the resources for the low carbon agriculture program. We earmarked resources for forest recovery and even for the acquisition of quotas. One more point, all the land issue that was in the hands of land reform is also in the hands of agriculture. Today, we are able to integrate all challenges, even land use. We are able to integrate all that on a very timely manner. As for the state of the art in our Forest Code, farmers really joined our land registry. We have the largest data bank in the world on rural land use. Now we have to qualify that inventory in order to move on to the regularization program. There are more than 6 million records that must be approved by our agency. And we believe that the solution involves the development of technologies that could perform fast analysis reducing the cost of analyzing all those records, eliminating the legal uncertainty. Last week, we had a meeting with state representatives where we presented that suggestion, a system to be implemented at state level. Well, that was it in terms of the forest code. We have another 20 minutes, and I want to give other people an opportunity to talk. There are companies who are trying to make the transformation viable on the ground. For example, Marfrig wants to track the whole supply chain from end to end. Schalke, this goes along the lines of the challenges mentioned before. State policies to make that environment prosper. Would you like to touch on that? I think this role of transformation involves society as a whole. We cannot hold the government responsible for that. The state is important, but it's not the only entity. It has to fight illegal deforestation. The state has to foster the legal land use. Brazil has a serious land use. The state should promote those solutions, but the private initiative must implement traceability, and the example you gave for Marfrig has to be replicated to other companies. And consumers must know where products come from in order to have complete traceability. So it's everyone's responsibility to address the problem of the illegal deforestation in the Amazon region, because it hurts Brazil. It only favors some illegal loggers, because 98% of the deforestation in the Amazon region is illegal. We must provide a solution to that. Schalke, you spoke about cheap money, and this raised interest. There is a question that I will ask Caio. How can you access those credits? Could they be used in Brazil? Caio, let me add another point. Let's speak about urban centers. Brazil also looks at development, looking at urban centers. How do we access those funds? These funds I mentioned, the European recovery funds, are funds to be used in Europe. But there is also an international dimension to that. For instance, Germany has different funds, ministries that you know, that are available. But as we speak, with all the facts that we see about deforestation and the deterioration of institutions like the Ministry of the Environment, those credits are closed. We must make progress in that dialogue. And Europe has resources, not only Germany. Europe has resources to be applied, but there are certain conditions that must be met. As for urban centers, Germany is also a good example, because the Green Party, that is a large party leading different states and municipalities, began in urban centers, greening the cities. In Europe, we also have a coalition of large cities. So they take all the necessary measures to have zero carbon by 2050. The European Climate Foundation that I also represent, along with Bloomberg, we have a club, a coalition of large urban centers around the world, many in Europe, especially in Germany, advancing that theme. There should be more Brazilian cities. There are some that should try and benefit from that technical assistance, trying to access existing funds. Thank you very much. Talking about technical assistance, it's important to remember that WRI Brasil has an excellence in this area of cities. As well as the recovery of certain areas, and that information can be shared should you be interested. Minister Levy, you raised the point on technological innovation, and you spoke about the role of gas. There were questions about how long that transition would take, because if that transition takes too long, you prevent other interesting sources of renewable energy to come into operation. Using your knowledge as a public manager, as investor, could you speak about that tight equation? As for gas, I would say the following. There is a bill to be approved that will change the use of gas to increase competition so that we can achieve lower prices. And it's important to have a low price for gas. Only then will it be competitive for the industry, where it would play an important role to reduce emissions and to improve the quality of certain processes. In the case of steel production, where it is somewhat used, it's halfway to the use of hydrogen, because methane has carbon and oxygen molecules. So when it turns ore into iron, it produces CO2 and water, and therefore it reduces emissions. In hydrogen, you produce only water. So what's more important right now is to ensure a level of competitiveness where more actors will be able to participate in the transportation of gas until you have free and independent consumers. As you said, over the next few years, gas should play an important role. And it makes sense for Brazil because most of our gas comes with oil. Most of that oil will be exported in the next 20 to 25 years. And we expect Brazilian oil will help reduce global emissions by shifting carbon. We know that the biggest source of emissions is coal used to produce electricity in northern countries, even in China. As that is shifted to oil, you reduce emissions and you create another bridge towards a totally green economy. So there are different paths. Funds will be important. The financial system is increasingly involved. The Federation of Banks is monitoring the number of loans going to green loans, about 20%. That is likely to increase even more. And investors are also interested in investing in green funds because there is evidence that oftentimes they provide a higher yield than conventional funds. Thank you, Levi. I think this is an important point. As Caio said, it's important to price carbon correctly. All of that will require from Brazil attention on In the social and environmental integrity, are we generating the expected results? At the end of the day, we are talking about ensuring a quality of excellence. And this is important for us because we have so many environmental resources. We should set the bar at the highest level. But on your report, Carol, you raised a very interesting point, which is how easy it is to waste money. And the worst thing we can do during a period of economic recovery is to waste money. And you also mentioned how important it is to invest well. Some people believe that we have to push technology everywhere using bits and bytes. But certain technologies require common sense and not necessarily quantum computing. For example, New York City tried to recover riverside forests. Your report touches that point. In these final moments, could you mention what else we can look at that you have uncovered, and what can we expect moving forward? Because apparently, will we have an Amazon-based new economy? Thank you, Marcelo. Our next study will be the new economy of the Amazon region. We are working towards that. Before I answer your question, let me just say that I'm representing a group of 15 researchers. This study was a collective effort coordinated by Viviane Romero, a researcher from WRI. A very interesting part of the study involved natural infrastructure called the nature-based solution. So although Brazil has to consider how that infrastructure will be developed, we have an almost perfect infrastructure that was given to us for free by nature. And we have learned that its appropriate and strategic use can reduce the consumption of public resources and the maintenance of large reservoirs of large cities like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. It shows that taking care of riverside forests around cities would reduce the cost of chemicals. In the wet season, it would help drainage. So there are so many important things given to us by nature. An important point to be emphasized, you spoke about batteries of electric buses. The new economy for a new era has two important pillars. One is to think of a circular economy. So bus batteries have to be developed in a non-linear fashion. There are many batteries being produced in the Amazon region. This is something else we must consider. Early on, there was a question, who stands to lose in the new economy? If it's done correctly, the idea is that sectors like the fossil fuel sectors can migrate to this new economy using new technologies like refineries. Studies show that these refineries might be very useful in the future for the production of biomass. So the key words are transition, circular economy, and let us use nature as a state-of-the-art technology. Thank you, Carol. Before I turn it over to Rachel Bitterman, our executive director for WRI Brasil, Caio, I really love your comment. for companies to have a disclaimer on environmental risk. Schalke, I didn't give you a chance to answer the question that I asked. I wanted to thank Caio for his comments. Suzano already discloses all our environmental risks. If you wish to access any indicator, our environmental indicators, you can go online and visit our website. But above all, I agree in using environmental risk, disclosing that clearly to society. We do that to all other risks. We will also do that to the environmental risk. Challenge accepted. Thank you very much. I'm very happy because we have to show investors that the Brazilian society is ready to undergo that transformation. On a personal note, I want to thank everyone for their participation. I'm here representing the board of WRI. I'm only one of a team of experts, people who take good care of WRI Brasil. And this report was not just conducted by Brazilian partners. We have an international team working with us, and I want to thank that international team. And I would like to turn it over to Rachel Bitterman to close our event. Thank you, Marcelo. Your moderation was fantastic. You were perfect. I want to thank each and every one of our panel members. It was an honor to hear suggestions and recommendations, as well as your visions. Brazil can move forward. There are solutions that are accessible to us. We can promote the best arrangement and adopt a competitive model in the future. All of that taken into account the need to promote social inclusion more than ever. Brazil is a very unequal country, and we can grow being green and inclusive. The solutions shown by Joaquim, Schalke, João, Carolina, show that technologies are available, resources are available. We need changes in our decision-making models, or perhaps small changes and the joint effort of all sectors. Nature-based solutions are the best ones that Brazil can offer the planet and mankind. We have conservation areas that are providing environmental services, sequestering carbon. We must avoid illegal occupation of land. We can use permanent protection areas, promote alternative use for degraded areas. We have a potential to recover degraded areas by intensifying agriculture and livestock production. João gave us good examples on how the Ministry of Agriculture has been thinking about solutions to a low carbon market. We have to follow that plan being proposed by the ministry. And the tax reform is about to be voted on at the Congress, and we need economic tools. If we do have a tax reform that considers low carbon and social inclusion, it will be beneficial to the country. Caio gave us many examples from Europe that inspire us. Companies that are large investors in Brazil, so there are signs coming from investors and historical partners. We can't ignore those partners that have helped Brazil so much, and especially consumers we depend on. Thank you all so much. On our website, we will have the link to this live. Our website is wribrasil.org.br. Thank you all very much for joining us. And please do contact us for partnerships. Looking forward to continue what we are doing together.